Hundreds are killed in a bombing in Sri Lanka. The fallout continues from the Mueller report, and Joe Biden announces his presidency run. I am Stephen Holland. This is the Americans Awful Recap. Sri Lanka was bombed, killing hundreds of people on Easter Sunday. Now, it's important to note that the government has announced that they will be giving funds to the families of the dead. But that still leaves 500 who were injured out in the dark. And it's important to note that the government has received warnings constantly about this attack happening in the past and the people who were responsible for it. And they mainly targeted churches that were booby-trapped by ISIS, who has also claimed responsibility for these actions. And it's just one example of how Christians are being persecuted. They are actually the #1 persecuted group in the world, according to Pew Research Center. Next, there's still carnage after a Mueller report was released. Now, I talked a lot about it in the last video, you can check it out, but pretty much the media is now saying that there was pretty much collusion when the report said that there was no collusion. And Adam Schiff, the House Intelligence Chairman, he talks a lot about it on Fox News.
Well, look, I think it's a very difficult decision, and we're going to have a caucus about this over the next couple weeks to try to figure out what the best course is, not for the party, but what's the best course for the country. I think it's certainly the case that an impeachment would be unsuccessful if the Republican Party continues to place party above country, continues essentially to back the president no matter how unethical or dishonest his conduct may be. And sadly, that's where we are right now. So we will have to decide, do we nonetheless go through an impeachment, because to do otherwise would signal that somehow this president's conduct is okay, that future presidents can engage in this kind of corruption without consequence, or do we decide that we're better off doing the oversight through the context of oversight hearings by the various committees rather than a formal impeachment? That's going to be a very consequential decision, and one that I'm going to reserve judgment on until we have a chance to fully deliberate about it.
Just one question. Was Hillary colluding when she asked foreign nationals to spy on the Trump campaign? Now, it's important to say that there will be backfire if the Democrats call for impeachment. Historically speaking, the presidents have, received a boost when they are called for impeachment. Bill Clinton received a lot of popularity and power once that was called. Seth Moulton has joined the Democratic race, and in all honesty, he's the 200th person at this point who has run for office. And, he's the most moderate when you compare him to Cory Booker or Kamala Harris. But in all honesty, he's not going to win the primary. If Democrats were smart, they would choose him because he's probably the most likely person to win an election. But in all honesty, the most radical people tend to vote in primaries, not the most moderate. Finally, Elizabeth Warren is calling for complete forgiveness of student loan debt. Now, first of all, it's important to point out that this is completely unconstitutional. The federal government can't come out and say that private debt is forgiven. It's also important to talk about why debt is so high. The reason why is because a lot of students go into university and they go into jobs that don't pay well. It's not practical for me as a journalist to go to NYU and pay $38,000 in tuition for a job that's going to pay me about $37,000 a year when I get out, and we need to end the mentality that if you don't go to college, you're somehow a loser. I'm telling you right now, a guy who doesn't go to college and works as a plumber is much smarter than a person who goes to college at Fordham and goes for gender studies. Finally, AOC came out this week with a brand new video about the Green New Deal. Now, it's amazing when you're AOC, okay, because you can just imagine that all these wonderful things will happen. You can remove climate change, you can pretty much make unemployment completely gone.
The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing-for-the-fence ambition we needed Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers.
I just have to say that this is my brand new favorite video, and it completely overtakes this one.
Wake me up!
Wake me up inside!
I can't wake up!
Wake me up inside!
Save me!
Call my name and save me from the dark!
On Tuesday and Wednesday, there is a new Ohio law banning child drag shows. Republicans argue that it's child exploitation for this to happen, while Democrats are saying that's anti-LGBTQ, and there's nothing wrong with it. Now I'm going to show you the video, and you tell me if this seems like child exploitation. Next, Bernie Sanders is asking for prisoners to have the right to vote.
The Constitution says is that everybody can vote. That is true. So people in jail can vote. Now, here is my view. If somebody commits a serious crime, sexual assault, murder, they're going to be punished. They may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. That's what happens when you commit a serious crime. But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people. Because once you start chipping away and you say, well, that guy committed a terrible crime, not going to let him vote. Or that person did that, not going to let that person vote. You're running down a slippery slope. So I believe that people commit crimes, they pay the price. When they got out of jail, I believe they certainly should have the right.
My opinion is that the problem is that criminals are wards of the state. And what that means is that you will have an interest in increasing the power of the state government. You can vote for candidates who will give you shorter sentences, a kind of bribery. Next, at a town hall meeting, Bernie was asked about whether he supports the Soviet Union, and this was his response.
So you think that the notion of a civil war running rife in that country is a misconception?
Oh, God, it's the same thing, they never learn. You may recall way back in, 1961, they invaded Cuba. And everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world, that all the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They had forgot that he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society. Not to say that Fidel Castro or Cuba are perfect. They are certainly not. But just because Ronald Reagan dislikes these people does not mean to say that the people in their own nations feel the same way.
Now, people can argue that Bernie doesn't believe this stuff anymore, so why doesn't he just call out the Soviet Union? Why doesn't he call out Venezuela or Nicaragua? Bernie was asked about whether they should put armed guards to defend kids in schools, and watch how he answers but shifts the goalposts immediately after.
We need fundamental reform in our criminal justice system, which is very, very broken right now. And one component, Nicholas, and I'm really delighted to hear that you're going into criminal justice, we need a lot of young people to get involved in criminal justice and to help us transform a criminal justice system that is not working right now. Let me just give you a few examples. As Americans, none of us, I think, are proud that we have more people in jail than any other major country on earth. We have more people in jail than China does. Disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native Americans.
There was also a town hall for Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg, but let's be honest for a second. Bernie is the thought leader of the party. Anything that he says, the other candidates will just mirror. So, in all honesty, you just saved 2 hours of your time. The only thing noteworthy about that is that apparently Elizabeth Warren uses Amazon to buy mailboxes. Finally, on Thursday and Friday, Joe Biden announces his run for the presidency. And in all honesty, this is a little bit scary. Trump right now polls at 35 to 40% against Joe. And Joe beats Trump when it comes to millennials, women, and independence, which is the most important one. There's an article on CNN that states how Biden is the most feared rival of Trump. And that's kind of true. My opinion is that Joe Biden is maybe a good politician, but he's definitely not a good runner. He's just had a record of complete failure over and over. He ran twice already and just failed spectacularly both times. And, he has a record that people will just dissect. Such as this video of him saying that African Americans are going to be put back in chains by Mitt Romney.
Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
President Trump fired a tweet back at him with saying, "Welcome to the race, Sleepy Joe. I only hope you have the intelligence, long in doubt, to wage a successful primary campaign. It will be nasty. You will be dealing with people who truly have some very sick and demented ideas. But if you can make it, I will see you at the starting gate." He announced his run with attacking Trump on Charlottesville, which you'll remember it was a white supremacist rally about a year ago, and Trump defended it by saying that there were good people on both sides.
You're putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane.
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is.
On both sides, sir, you said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
This is a part of Biden's video where he's attacking Trump.
We haven't always lived up to these ideals. Jefferson himself didn't, but we have never before walked away from them. Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. It was there on August of 2017 we saw Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis come out in the open.
Now, the problem with all of this is that the Democratic Party is attached to anti-Semitism. Any sort of attack that Biden has on Trump with white supremacism, Trump can immediately fire back with Ilhan Omar. Why Biden did not, critique her on her remarks about 9/11. Obama needs to endorse Biden if he wants any shot of the presidency. And so far, Obama has not made any sort of pull towards any candidate, and he actually made, though, about 6.3 million funds in 24 hours, which is the biggest out of any politician running right now. And Joe Biden is now leading the pack, so all guns will be pointed at him. For all the people that think that Trump can't win, let me just remind you that 3 years ago, people were saying that Hillary Clinton would win by 95% chance. Okay, anything is possible at this point. And Trump has honestly had a successful economy. He just had a 3.2% growth, which is a record high. And the bottom line is that people vote based on the economy. If the economy is bad, you're not going to get another shot. That was true for Hoover, that was true for Carter, and it is very likely that Trump will have a second term. Next up, Joe went on The View on Friday and just honestly acted very intellectually dishonest. Fast and Furious? How about when you gave leeway to Putin to invade Crimea? What about selling out Israel to the Iran deal? How about when the IRS targeted conservative groups? How about when you spied on the Trump campaign? really there's no scandals at all. No scandals. Next, it seems that the other candidates are turning more and more radical. It seems that Cory Booker was speaking at a She the People event and stated how Trump's comments on Ilhan Omar is very Islamophobic.
The criticisms of Congresswoman Omar, what Donald Trump has been saying about her, is reprehensible. It is trafficking in Islamophobia, and it should be condemned by everyone. This kind of selective condemnation should be a chorus of people condemning it. And more than this, the kind of language our president uses, especially about black women in power, the kind of language this president uses, it is toxic. It fuels the kind of hate we see in our communities manifesting itself in the kind of terrorism that has been most seen in our nation since 9/11.
So let's just all be clear for a moment. Cory Booker is now excusing anti-Semitic remarks about 9/11 by saying that, it's Islamophobic. He's covering it in an umbrella by just saying Islamophobic if you critique Ilhan Omar. Finally, we have Hillary Clinton, who came out today and she talked about the Mueller report, okay? And she complained that the Russians were trying to hack the election. And usually, just as a general rule, when people lose an election, you kind of get out of the public eye. But Hillary just constantly doesn't know when to go. She just keeps on coming. That's what politicians usually do. But Hillary just doesn't know when to leave. And in all honesty, she needs to accept that the only reason why she lost was because of herself. She didn't lose it because of Trump. She didn't lose because of, Russia or sexism or the glass ceiling or anything. It was only her fault. Okay, so that's all the news for this week. I'm Stephen Hall, and this is the Americans All For Recap.